All right, your Bibles can fall open, if they would, to Genesis chapter 13 in our ongoing study of Abram, before his name is changed to Abraham. But let me ask this question. I imagine some of you have been around long enough that you have seen circumstances where sometimes families can struggle in relationships. Isn't it a tragedy when brothers or sisters or children or grandparents, isn't it a tragedy when family members get so estranged that they stop talking to each other? Maybe some of you have seen a circumstance like I have unfortunately witnessed where maybe someone passes away and there's a debate and a dispute over the inheritance, and it can get ugly. And it shouldn't be that way, should it? People who are of the household of faith. All right, so we're going to deal with a story in Genesis that's really kind of like that. And we can learn from this lesson of Abram how to respond when we have stress among family members. All right? There can be a godly response, or there can be a response that doesn't honor God at all. And so, as we consider Genesis chapter 13, I want to just bring you into the text by reminding you, based on what Bill Levergood spoke on last week about Abram and Sarai and Lot going down to Egypt. That was one of those episodes where they went down there because of a famine, but there's no comment that God was ever consulted about that decision. In fact, then Abram made some pretty bad choices that God had to extract him from. But even in that bad decision, Abram came out of Egypt with even greater wealth. I mean, Pharaoh literally said, "You go ahead and leave, and here, take these things and go." And so it says that he came back to the area of Canaan with Lot. Verse 2 says, "And Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver and gold. And he went on his journeys from the south, coming in probably through the Sinai Peninsula. He's in the south part of Canaan. And he goes ahead and goes up a little bit further north of Jerusalem. And it says that he came from the south even to Bethel, unto the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Hai, unto the place of the altar which he had made there at the first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord." Okay? So you'll remember in a discussion we had a couple weeks ago, after migrating across the Fertile Crescent, going to find a city whose builder and maker was God, Abram had no clue where God was taking him, except in the direction of Canaan, but he didn't know where. He ended up at Shechem, which is to become Shechem, and then after a short time there where he built an altar, he moves over to Bethel and builds an altar. That's the altar he's now returning to after his Egyptian foray. So it's at that location, after worshiping God, that this strife begins to develop between Abram's herdsmen and the great wealth that Abram had, and Lot and his herdsmen and all the things Lot had accumulated. Now what you need to understand, of course, Lot is Abram's nephew. And had it not been for Abram, Lot wouldn't have had much. It was the blessings of God upon Abram that Lot reaped so much of this benefit. But now, Lot in his own right is independently wealthy. In fact, even later, as we read in this story, Abram's going to end up going down around Hebron, again back down further south. And the people of Hebron are going to call him, "You're a prince in our land," because of all of his blessings that God had given him. This was unheard of, to have a nomad who had no place to live, wandered around from place to place looking for grazing land, to have this kind of wealth, this kind of influence, to the point where the people of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, will call him a prince in the land. Well, that's Abram, and it's because Abram recognizes God did this. And what a blessing to always prioritize and understand and make sure we understand the blessings we have are from the hand of God. Abram understood that. And so they're going to come to this, after this altar experience, we're going to see this strife developing. And it's all because Lot's herds and Abram's herds and his cattle and his donkeys and all of his camels, all of those things, there's just not enough land to support both of these huge groups of animals. There's not enough grazing land. There's not enough water. And so watch the beautiful solution and spirit-led solution that Abram comes to. All right? Verse 5. And Lot also went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. And the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's cattle and the herdsmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanites and the Perizzites dwelleth then in the land. And Abram said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee. Now, the inference of that is that what started out in the fields, strife between the people who were watching the flocks and the herds over the available pasture land, apparently that had spilled over to where even Abram and Lot had strife. Now, based upon Abram's response to this, I believe it's Lot that's got the problem. And that's going to be borne out in the rest of Lot's life. Okay? So, for whatever reason, very selfishly, Lot is upset that he's not getting priority with his animals. And so Abram, in a very spiritual way, trusting God, said, We're brethren. We can't do this. We're brethren. Now, I don't know of any situation in this room here tonight, but maybe you have knowledge of a situation, maybe in your family, maybe in somebody else's family, where you've seen this kind of tension, strife, bordering on hatred in a family. For Christians, this should not be. We are brethren. Right? And so what Abram gives us a picture of is how we're to try to resolve conflict rather than allow it to be exacerbated and turn into something even worse. Notice the magnanimous gift of Abram's solution here. Now let's just be honest. I've already said if it hadn't been for Abram, Lot would have had very little. So he's been blessed just because he's hanging out with his uncle Abram. But it's Abram that should have had first choice here. I mean, he's a prince in the land. Even the pagans viewed him that way. And Abram legitimately had the right to say, even on the virtue of the fact that he is the primogeniture, he's the oldest, he is the patriarch. He should have had the right to say, okay, I'm going to choose. And I'm going to choose the best. I've got the right to do that. But notice the selflessness of Abram in this. And it also boils down to his trust in God for the outcome. Notice what it says. And verse 9. Is not the whole land before us? This is Abram speaking. Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. Abram's giving Lot first option here. You see, one thing we find in the life of Abram, and it's true in a lot of these stories, Abram had very loose control of his possessions. These are not things that are going to cause him to stumble. He recognizes all of this is from God. But he doesn't hold on so tightly to his possessions that he's selfish in his decisions. And so Abram said, Lot, you choose. Whichever way you go, we'll go a different direction so that we can find land that can sustain both of our families and all of our herds and flocks. Now watch Lot's decision making. Now there's never a situation in Lot's life where we see Lot consulting God. Now, Peter says in the New Testament that Lot's righteous soul was vexed because he lived with the Sodom people. In other words, based on that statement, at least from the New Testament recognition, Lot had a degree of righteousness that probably made him a believer. But he sure didn't have much faith. And he sure doesn't consult God on his decision making. This was the criteria that he used. Don't you think Lot should have probably said, oh, Uncle Abram, no, you choose first. Whatever direction you go, I'll go the other way. You choose first. You should get the best. Abram makes this proposal, and Lot goes, yeah, let's do this. And then he starts looking around. Now they're at Bethel, which is an elevated area overlooking the Jordan River. You can see from Bethel, you can see on a clear day all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. And so he is there at this altar, and Abram said, you choose. Verse 10, and Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld the plain of Jordan. Now, this is talking about the Jordan River, all right? The plain of the Jordan River. That it was well watered everywhere before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves, the one from the other. Verse 12, and Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent towards Sodom. Okay, a couple of very interesting things there. First of all, prior to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, there were actually 5 of these cities down around the Jordan River, north of the Dead Sea, and down near the Dead Sea. In those days, it was well watered. It was great pasture lands. The 5 cities of the plains, Sodom and Gomorrah, and each of these cities had their own king. They were like city-states. Okay? There was a city called Admah. There was a city called Zeboim. and then there was the city of Zoar, which we just read about here. Does anybody know which one of those 5 cities was not destroyed when God rained down his judgment, fire and brimstone, upon Sodom and Gomorrah? Because 4 of the 5 were destroyed. Does anybody know which one was not? Zoar, yes. The city of Zoar, we know, was not destroyed at the time, because as Lot and his family are fleeing, his 2 daughters, his wife initially, the angels point them to go to the direction of Zoar. And it was because that city was not going to be destroyed when the other 4 were. All right? Okay. So Lot, get the picture, Lot chooses this well-watered area. In those days, the Jordan River was plentiful. It was a large river that came into the Dead Sea, but even in ancient times, 4,000 years ago, Abraham's time, they irrigated this area. They took water out of the Jordan River plus other rivers that came into the Jordan and then dumped into the Dead Sea. They used this irrigation to make this whole land productive. And that's what Lot saw. Isn't there something in the Bible about the lust of the eyes? In fact, did you catch it when I read it? What was this land in Lot's mind? What did this land remind him of? Say it. Okay, yes, I'm going to get to that first, but what did it say first? Not just Egypt, say it. The garden of the Lord. What's that? Eden. Now, Lot had never seen Eden, but he had heard about Eden. And in his mind, looking at the direction of this well-watered plains around the Jordan River, he said, this is like the garden of the Lord. Or it's like Egypt. They had just been to Egypt, right? And they understood, and you would too if you were ever there, Egypt is a vast desert wasteland except right by the Nile River. Extremely fertile. It was the cradle of life for the Egyptians. That's why they worshipped the Nile and the gods of the Nile. So in Lot's mind, that's what he was picking. The best. This is like the garden. It's like Egypt near the Nile River. That's where I want to go. And so without praying about it, without even considering what he was taking his family into, he goes down to the well-watered plains around the Jordan River near the Dead Sea. Did you catch that phrase? I emphasized it at the end of verse 12. And he pitched his tent towards Sodom. When he first went there, he didn't move right into Sodom. But you know what he saw every time he came out his tent every morning? There was Sodom. And you know exactly what happened. The next time we read about Lot, he's not sitting in a tent. He's in Sodom. Next time we read about Lot in chapter 19, he's actually been elevated to an elder in the city, a judge. He's in the gate of Sodom, where the elders would assemble to pass judgments, make laws. He's one of those kinds of leaders. He's no longer a sojourner. He now lives in Sodom with all of its wickedness. All right, it's a little off topic from what we're going to get back to here in a minute with Abram. But when God told Abram, chapter 18, Abraham now, when God told Abraham he was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because of its wickedness, what was Abraham's reaction? Yeah, Dan says he bargained with him. Yes. Remember, Abraham said, God, would you destroy the huge city? But what about the righteous that live there? What if there are 50 righteous people? Will you spare the city for 50 righteous? And God said, okay, if there are 50, I'll spare it. And you'll remember, the end of chapter 18, Abraham says, now, Lord, please don't get mad, but what about 45? God said, I'll spare for 45. Okay, well, peradventure, what about 40? Okay, I'll spare it for 40. What about 30? What about 20? And what's the final number? What about 10? And God said, even I have my minimum quotas, 10, but nothing less. Okay? I want you to see this. When the angels came to Sodom and told Lot to get out of the city, he had become so conditioned to living around the ungodliness of Sodom that he thought like one of them. His mind was perverted. He came up with crazy ideas. But if you read the passage in Genesis 19 very carefully, I'll just tell you the Cliff Notes version, but these two angels who had been with God and Abraham, they come on to Sodom. And Lot's sitting in the gate of Sodom. And he sees these two men and he says, my lords, please come in, spend the night with me. Rest, take hospitality. And their first answer was, nah, we'll just sleep here in the square. And the Bible says, and he pressed upon them greatly that they not do that. You need to come to my house. And they finally capitulate. And he feeds them. He gives them hospitality. It's very generous. But at that point, he has no idea these are angelic beings. As far as he's concerned, these are just two visitors. So the story develops this way. You'll remember some of these wicked men of the city. They come from all parts of the city. They come to Lot's house. And they said, let us have those two men that came to your house, that we may know them carnally. And Lot slips out the door and closes the door behind him and says, brethren, do not this wickedness. And they said, who made you a judge over us? You're just a sojourner who came here, and now you're going to judge us? You better give up those two guys, or we'll do worse to you than we're going to do to them. As unbelievable as this was for us to consider, Lot proposed, I have two daughters that have never known a man, two virgin daughters. Take them, but leave these two men alone. Therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. That's hospitality language. He's taken the responsibility of these people being there, and he says, I can't. I must protect them. But what a wicked option to give his two daughters up. And again, they said, get out of our way. They weren't interested in that solution. Okay, this is what I want you to see. I don't know if you've ever seen it before. But in Genesis 19, if you want to turn over there, just since we're talking about it, just a couple pages over. This is what it says. And so they press upon Lot while he's outside the door. And it says at that point that the two men inside the house open the door just enough to grab Lot and pull him inside and close the door. Right? And then, and this is the moment where Lot comes to understand these are supernatural angelic beings, because they smote the men with blindness that were outside the house. And as sinful and degraded as it sounds, these guys keep groping to find the door. They're that wicked. And so now the angels, which have revealed their supernatural abilities, they tell Lot, this is why we're here. Okay, notice this. Verse 11, they smote the men, both small and great, with blindness. Verse 12, and the men said to Lot, now watch this. How many are in the house? How many of Lot's family are in the house? Well, we didn't talk about her, but she's there. His wife, right? Lot, his wife, and his two daughters. His two virgin daughters. Okay? Watch this. Verse 12. And the men said to Lot, hast thou any besides? Son-in-law, and thy sons, and thy daughters, and whatsoever thou hast in the city, bring them out of this place, for we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxen great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord hath sent us to destroy it. Verse 14. See if you've ever seen this. And Lot went out and spake unto his sons-in-law, which married his daughters, and said, get up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his sons-in-law. Do you get the picture? Lot has himself, his wife, and his two virgin daughters. These verses tell us that he has at least two married daughters, because it says sons-in-law. So there are at least two married daughters and two sons-in-law. How many do we need? How many righteous do we need to save the whole place? We need 10. And in Lot's family, there are at least 8. Who knows if there's some grandkids here? Maybe there's a third daughter with a third son-in-law. Do you see the picture? If Lot had just made an impact on his own family, there would have been 8, maybe 10. But because he had become so accustomed to living in Sodom, it all started with him pitching his tent toward Sodom. After a while, he's in there. And now he becomes so desensitized to the evil and wickedness that's around him all the time, he doesn't make any impact on his own family. Because the next day, only 4 get out initially. And it says, as we keep reading, it says, and as he lingered, the angels physically took him by the hand, and the hand of his wife, and the hands of his daughters, and they led them out. They said, we have to get out of here. God is going to destroy this place. We've got to go. And he brings them outside the city, and then he says, you guys run. Run as fast as you can, as far as you can toward the mountains, and don't look back. Now, as a young man, I used to read that story, and I used to say that when Lot's wife turned around and looked, she was missing Macy's, J.C. Penney's, and Sears. Couldn't bear to leave Sodom. But after I came to know the rest of the story, as that city is being destroyed, Lot, his wife, turned around because she had daughters and maybe grandkids dying in that conflagration. Now, it doesn't justify. She was told, don't turn around or you'll be judged. But she did turn around. Okay. I'm only pointing this out because it shows how Lot made all of the choices of his life based on his own selfish desires. He wanted what was best for him. And in many of those circumstances, what was best for Lot turned out to be the worst choices he could make, even leading to the destruction of his family. All right, I don't want to go any further into this part of the story. Let's go back to chapter 13 just to finalize some thoughts about Abram. I love it. Abram, so selfless, gives Lot the choice. He chooses the best. And Abram goes the other direction. It tells us that he goes down. In fact, let me read it. He goes down verse 14. And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up now thine eyes. This is a beautiful thing. He says to Abram, look now, lift up your eyes, look from the place where you are, look northward, look southward, look east, look west, as far as you can see. And then he goes on to say, walk around, Abram, every place you walk. All of this one day is going to be yours. You are going to fulfill the promise that I have given you and the covenant we have established together. You are going to be a great nation. And the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. That's why we still talk about with amazement, after 1900 years in exile, no Jews living in the land of promise, but they came back. And it's God that brought them back, because it's still the land he promised to Abraham. Verse 16, and I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. Well, how much dust is there on the planet? I'm doubting that anybody's ever tried to count it. But keep in mind, at this point in the story, he's still Abram. She's still Sarai. They still have 0 children. And God just keeps saying, I'm going to make a great nation of you, Abraham. Trust and obey. And Abram just keeps on doing. But God, in this promise, God says, look at all of it. It's yours. And you know what's interesting about it? The land of Abram that he was going to one day inherit for him and all of his inheritance, it was the land that Lot chose too. I mean, Abram was going to get it all. And that's one of the bread baskets of the Middle East, down around the Jordan River now, where they have so many crops. Okay, verse 18. Then Abram removed his tent, came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. Once again, Abram goes someplace, going to stay there a while. One of his first acts, he builds an altar to worship God. And that's his pattern. Wherever he goes, he does that. Hebron is going to turn out to be where he spends the rest of his life. In fact, we get over into chapter 23 and some of those places, and Sarah dies. Genesis 23, verse 1. Does anybody know how old Sarah was when she died? Well, I know some of you will get there shortly, so I'll tell you. 127 years old. You have to say something. Now, you can't just say, oh, I was really close. I didn't hear any guesses. But Sarah was? Yes, I'm sure that's true, Bill. Yes. And apparently you were there? Okay, my point is this. Do you know, it says that Sarah's 127 years old when she dies, Do you know that's the only place in the Bible where the age of a woman is ever given when she dies? Even 4,000 years ago, women didn't want to tell their age. I'm just saying. I don't know. But in that chapter, Sarah dies, and a most important thing happens. Because Abraham, at that point, has to find a place to bury Sarah. So he goes to the sons of Heth, the people of Hebron, and says, I'd like to buy a piece of property so I can bury my dead. And you know what they said to him? Abraham, you're a great prince. You pick any place you want, it's yours. He said, no, I want to buy it. And they said, what? Just take it. And he says, I'll tell you, there's a piece of, I've noticed, a piece of property I'd like to buy if it's available. Ephron has a piece of property down there, beautiful. It's got trees and it's got a big cave. I'd like to buy that. Well, Ephron steps forward and says, it's yours. And Abraham says, no, I want fair price. What would you, if you were going to sell it, what would you sell it for? And Ephron says, 400 pieces of silver. And Abram said, okay. And he said, no, what's 400 pieces of silver between us? Just take it. Abram said, no, I'm going to buy it. And so he measures out the number. And by the way, that probably was high Ephron wasn't giving him a deal on this thing. He was taking advantage of, it must have been high market value in those days because he said a high number. Abraham, without blinking, said, I'll pay it. This is the point of that. And it says it so clearly in chapter 23 that he bought the cave of Machpelah from Ephron, the son of Heth, in Hebron. And that is the burial place. But if you read the story, it says specifically they go before the leaders of the city. He pays the money in front of them as witnesses. And it says that they write out a title deed to the land. Do you know up to that point, Abraham was a nomad. Now, everywhere he walked, God said, it's going to be yours. But the thing about him buying that cave, that meant he was a legitimate property owner in Canaan. And that title deed will be passed along to all of his family members that they can prove that Abraham bought that land. And by God's gift, but also by Abraham's purchase, he was now a property owner in the land of Canaan. And God said, I'll take you to a city whose builder and maker is God. And Abraham so trusted, he nailed down his anchor right there and said, okay, I'm going to purchase this piece of land. And do you know today that still in Hebron, there is now a mosque over the place where Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Jacob and Rebekah, all of them are buried at the cave of Machpelah in Hebron. And because Abraham's involved, both the Jews and the Muslims venerate Father Abraham. Had many sons, kind of like the sands of the dust of the earth. But the two sons he had really made a mess of things. Got Isaac and Ishmael, and still fighting over. Okay, another topic for another time. Do you see it though? Abraham was such a selfless man. Didn't want there to be strife among his family. So he said, you choose. He loosely let go of all of his possessions. He didn't care as long as they were reconciled. And then God did what God always does. Abraham was selfless, but God just made him greater. because the blessings of God, excuse me, I've had this cough ever since I got back from China. Just kidding. Where was I? Oh, yeah. You know what? It's a picture of how every one of us should deal in the case if there's ever strife among our family and or our brethren in the household of God. We should esteem others better than ourselves. That's what it says in Philippians 2, right? Look everyone upon the needs of others. And that's how in Christian love all of these circumstances should be resolved. That's our man Abraham, giving us a great picture of it. All right. I've got a lot more that I could say, and you know that's true. But Bill, if you would come and lead us in some prayer time, please. I made this announcement already about Dan Bishop and that, but